up, Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
All right, welcome everybody to this week's Breaking History. Gordon and I have been talking a little bit about some of the topics we're going to be discussing, and obviously what's on everybody's mind right now is also on our mind. We share everyone's concerns. Everyone should be very, very concerned right now, and also not quick to leap to conclusions that are too definitive about what just happened in Syria. There's a lot of unknowns, a lot of dynamics at play. So we're going to, introduce what I think are going to be a few educated hypotheses. But again, we have to remain somewhat flexible. Don't get too black-pilled. Also, don't get too white-pilled about, how everything is controlled. This is all like a brilliant trap to entrap the bad guys. So I don't think extremes are ever good. So we're going to go into a little bit of both hypotheses and a little bit more. And then we're going to take a step back. We're going to look at some broader dynamics outside of Syria and the broader Middle East that might take us all the way to Asia. But before we go into the first word from today's sponsor, Gordon, how you doing, man?
I'm great. I'm great. It's been a pretty wild couple weeks. Been a pretty wild couple days. Lots of things happening around the world. Syria is obviously at the forefront of most of the headlines. I have some pretty interesting things to share, so we will. Looking forward to it, man. Let's do the ad read.
Yeah, let's do it. All right. Here, let me just run into that. This is River, I believe. BTC. 1 second. All right. River announces Bitcoin interest on cash. Now US dollars in your River account will earn a high yield interest rate that can be paid in Bitcoin. With the prices of groceries, mortgage, and tuition on a steep rise, people are now looking at a retirement age of 80 instead of 60. It's all because dollars are losing value at a record pace. The challenge is finding a way to hold on to your dollar while still getting ahead. That's where River Bitcoin comes in. River Bitcoin's interest on cash project protects your dollars with FDIC insurance while offering you the option to reap the potential gains of Bitcoin. Over the past 2 years, you would have earned 2 times the rate of most high-yield savings accounts and 16 times the rate of the national average savings account with Bitcoin interest on cash. Get started at badlandsmedia.tv/River. Move your cash to River today and start earning a real interest rate with Bitcoin. That's badlandsmedia.tv/River. So, all right. So, where would you like to begin regarding the Syria question today, Gordon?
Well, before we get to Syria, let me just share something that I think is going to be fascinating. Why is it not letting me do that? Not that tab window. Stand by for processing. There it is. Okay. It wasn't letting me share the right thing. And this is my screen sharing. That's always the second thing. There you go. I just saw this as we were going live. Didn't even get a chance to tell you before we hit live, but Eric Trump just announced another Trump Tower in Saudi Arabia. This one is in Jeddah. So this is the second Trump Tower that has been announced in 2024. The first was in Riyadh, and the second is now in Jeddah. Jeddah is the coastal kind of beach town. I have a friend who lives there. People with money. It's like if you want to, if you want to live in a nice beach kind of community, and you have money, Jeddah is kind of where you go. So this makes perfect. Actually, the first time when they announced the first Trump Tower, I was surprised that it wasn't in Jeddah. When they said it was in Riyadh, I was like, that makes sense because that's where MBS is building everything. But now they're doing one in Jeddah. This one actually is more on brand, I think, with Trump Tower than the other one. But this, as you can see, pretty impressive architecture.
Yeah.
Sleek.
Yeah.
So, yeah, very sleek, very sleek.
And that's a 3D graphic, or that's a
model?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. This is definitely a 3D rendering for sure. I'm familiar with the program they're probably using here. Looks good. Where I wanted to go as well is I wanted to hold on. There's a General Flynn reposted something that I think is absolutely worth discussing about Syria. So I did a show with Alpha Warrior on Sunday that aired on Monday night. We did like a two-hour discussion on Syria, where went into a lot of the things we discussed on this show, but some new stuff as well. So that might be worth checking out. It's on Alpha's Rumble channel. Was on Badlands Daily yesterday. I did my little 20-minute riff, the consolidated version of what I did with Alpha. But this is something that came up this morning that I think is really interesting, and that Ben Shapiro video, we will talk about that in a minute. But first, I wanted to share this. This is interesting because General Flynn is someone who I obviously have a very high respect for, and see a lot of things eye to eye with him. I think share a lot of his views. But the one thing that where him and Trump and Ezra Cohen Watnick and some of these other figures that we suspect are involved in what would be John Harold's devolution theory, they all have a certain view on Israel that they publicly express, and that runs contrary to the stuff that I talk about and my analysis. And a lot of people have a problem with that, and that's fine. This is interesting though, because this is what I think is some signal. So General Flynn this morning reposted this other person's thread, and he said, a must read, exceptional analysis and reporting, really well done. So what? Be careful what you ask for. And then, quote, want to know Syria's future? Look at Idlib, the province under, quote unquote, rebels' control. Yeah. And then, so let's just scroll through this real quick. We don't have to look. I mean, this is a pretty long, I think it's a ton of posts, but we can just kind of scroll through real quick and look at some of the stuff. This is interesting. I saw this map floating around the past couple of days. What happened in 2011 was not a civil war. I'm reading the post. It was a proxy war waged by 100,000 plus jihadis flown into Syria from all over the world. And this map shows where all these jihadis came from. This is information that a lot of people have been looking at for a while. This is a really nice graphic, I think, that captures a lot of that and kind of shows how this Operation Gladio kind of color revolution was run against everything we talked about with Colonel Tanner Watkins over the past 2 weeks. Here, the weapons, they're talking about the weapons being flown in from all over the world. And again, like we said last week, being flown into Turkey, and then from Turkey, they're being walked into Syria. So most of the weapons, as you can see, are going into Turkey in this graphic, and then they're being taken to Syria. Here is the collusion to topple Assad involved many countries. U.S. and Israel supplied weapons, money, and propaganda. Saudi Arabia and Qatar provided money. Al Jazeera did the propaganda. Turkey and Jordan played key roles in logistics. UK provided propaganda and established the white helmets. France recruited traitors. And then you have this Venn diagram that says the red is moderate rebels, FSA, which is the Free Syrian Army. Al-Qaeda is in the green, ISIS in the blue, and then they all kind of overlap. And so the moderate rebels, quote unquote, is the UK, France, USA, and Israel. ISIS is being funded by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and Jordan. And then Al-Qaeda is kind of this third circle that overlaps the two of them. I mean, I would argue that the moderate rebels are Al-Qaeda, but that's kind of semantics. It's, what's the difference between Al-Qaeda and these moderate rebels? The moderate rebels, by the way, they're referring to, I believe, HTS. And the leader of HTS, I'm doing a write-up for the news brief tomorrow. Al-Jalani, I think is his name. He's a former Al-Qaeda guy. He was the top lieutenant to. Not only is he a former Al-Qaeda guy, but he was the top lieutenant to
al-Baghdadi.
Al-Baghdadi, like the guy, the leader of ISIS, who Trump had killed. So he was not only Al-Qaeda, but he was also ISIS, and now he's the leader of the quote moderate rebels. So these three circles are pretty much just one circle, but you can break them down if it makes you feel better to more. And then this is just more stuff that we've talked about on the show, talking about these pipelines, talking about Greater Israel, Fashion Week, talking about the New York Times section listed 31 places to visit in the world. Damascus, capital of Syria, was ranked number 7. This is 2010. So, and that's because back then it was a very different place than it is now. It wasn't destabilized yet. And then, so this is where it gets interesting. And this is where I want to point this out. It talks about, how the West once loved Assad. He was called the Lion of Damascus. France gave him the highest award, the Legion of Honor. Queen Elizabeth invited Assad and his wife to visit. Nancy Pelosi met with him in Syria. The European and Arab leaders met with him all the time. The Pope went to Syria. It says right here, Syria under Assad was secular and moderate. Sunni, Shia, Christians, Alawites, Kurds, Armenians, etc. all got along with each other. No Al-Qaeda, no Sharia law, no Muslim Brotherhood. And then you just see pictures of, what looks like a moderate society. It says Syrians loved Assad. He could walk around and drive around Damascus and Syria without a huge security force. In fact, the Arab world loved him. In a 2009 Zogby poll, an American firm, Assad was the most popular leader in the region. Assad is also a good father and a husband. He raised smart, down-to-earth, and compassionate children, and here's pictures of him with his kids. That, to me, is a big deal. I've talked about before Amos Hochstein, the lifelong Democrat diplomat that is part of the Biden administration, but Trump has also talked about him publicly, and he's the one who's been suing for peace between Hezbollah and the IDF. I think it's a big deal when someone's a good parent, when these world leaders are a good parent, because that's not an easy thing to do. When you have a demanding job. So the fact that they make time for that and they don't like outsource that to, the help, so to speak, and they're able to raise good kids, that to me says something about their character. So, Asma Assad was the ideal first lady. This is his wife. She's very attractive, and she seems like a nice person just based on optics. But of course, that's easy to manufacture. I have to point that out. And then it says, for reasons discussed earlier, the U.S. and its evil friends decided to do a regime change in Syria. The moderate rebels were neither moderate nor rebels. They are low IQ extremists and head chopping terrorists aligned with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and that is absolutely true. And then these just shows all the different images of what's come out of Syria. And then it says, while U.S. NATO-funded terrorists targeting Christians, it was Assad who protected Christianity in all of its forms. When the rebels destroyed historic Christian monasteries, Assad visited and rebuilt them. So here you have Assad being a defender of Christianity, which is something I've known for a while, even before I really got deep into the Middle East stuff. I always had heard that he was the guy protecting Christians. And so the reason I wanted to share this is because this narrative that this account is weaving here, which General Flynn has tapped into and said this is really, really good, accurate analysis. This runs completely contrary to what Benjamin Netanyahu says about and the Western media say about Assad, what Lindsey Graham says about Assad, what the Republican Party says about Assad, the official narrative on him. And so the fact that General Flynn is pointing this out and saying everyone should read this thread to better understand Assad, that's signal to me. That's signal to me that he's going against the narrative, not only the narrative, which is not unusual for a guy like Flynn, but he's going against Netanyahu. He's going against Israel and like what Israel is doing right now. And we're going to get into that here in a little bit. That like what I just wrote about the Christians is important because here you have, I want to play this real quick. This is like 3.5 minutes, and I'll try to. Well, do you want to respond to that thread before I play this?
No, I think that was very cogent, and I'm sure most of the people watching this show are probably inoculated against a lot of that sort of CIA psyoping branding of Bashar al-Assad as the butcher Assad or the butcher Bashar as he's been labeled for the past 13 years since 2011. But I mean, like you said, this guy Al-Jolani, this is just something that somebody sent me that was published on the U.S. Embassy's website in Syria in 2017 when HTS was first placed on the official terrorist list, as it was recognized as being a rebranding of Jabhat al-Nusra that was also placed on the terrorist list. And this is a call for a $10 million reward on any evidence or any information that leads to the capture of this guy as second in command of Al-Qaeda under, as you just pointed out, Abu Bakr
al-Baghdadi.
Bakir al-Baghdadi, thank you. So this is like the height of hypocrisy. This is the guy who's been proven as the actual, head chopper for years. I mean, he got into this game in 2007 as a head chopper. He rose through the ranks quickly, efficiently. He had vast patronage from very high-level forces, and Baghdadi sent him directly into Syria in the earliest days of the Arab Spring in 2011 out of Iraq, where he had formerly cut his teeth, literally, murdering civilians en masse. And he's been based in Idlib, and he was the major driver, or at least he's been sold to the population as the leader of this thing. But as we know, there's never a leader whenever you deal with these regime change operations, whether it's the Free Syrian Army or any of the terrorist outfits that the West is told are, free pro-democracy loving agencies in Libya or anything. You look for a leader that's authentic. They're never there. Or in Georgia, or in the case of, Ukraine, what do they get? They got a Zelensky. They obviously these synthetic cardboard cutouts who can't be in a room by themselves because they need handlers. They need controllers to tell them what to say, how to act, how to dress, how to cut their beards to look a certain way based upon marketing teams that have been working on propaganda and publicity so that they could sell an image of these so-called leaders, but they're never leaders. They're never authentic. And I think this guy, other than maybe his passion for some dream of a caliphate based upon some radical Sharia ideology that involves killing mostly Muslims who don't subscribe to his specific Salafist orientate or interpretation of the Quran, I don't think that there's much knowledge other than how to cut off heads coming out of this guy or his collaborators. So yeah.
Well, no. And what you just said is so like poignant and so spot on. And the other night, last night, the Badlands Story Hour guys did the movie The Network, which I'd never seen before. And I don't know if you've seen it, but it is like a 50-year-old movie. It came out 50 years ago, and it basically just talks about how everything on television is fake, and everything that is presented to you as reality prime, as Chris Paul calls it, is basically just fabricated by marketing teams and thrown together on television. And it basically, if you're not seeing it in your real life, even the stuff you are seeing in your real life, like your actual physical reality, it's fake. It's like everything that's just put in front of you is contrived. And, I took 2 years ago, I spoke to these guys, and I asked them if I could interview them on camera, and they said yes. And I fell out of touch with them, and I need to figure out a way to reestablish contact so I can get them on. I'd love to have them on Badlands and talk to them. But High Value Target Team guys, this was a year and a half ago. And they, I was on a phone call with a buddy who was friends with these two guys, and both of them are like special forces. They were both high value target teams, meaning one of them was in Afghanistan for 10 years, one of them was in Iraq for 10 years, and their job was basically to go into these safe houses and extract terrorists alive so they could be questioned for intelligence, and then gather up all the materials they find in the safe house, whatever, like do a raid. And so I asked him, this is like when I was first kind of cultivating, I had all these ideas in my head, but I didn't really know if they were how much they mapped onto reality. This idea that all is radical Islamic terrorism is contrived and manufactured and fake. And I asked him, what's your experience? I didn't even like preface it with any of that stuff. I just asked him, what was your experience? And they told me, like, they just went there on their own. They said, in 10 years, raided a lot of places, raided a lot of houses, captured a lot of terrorists. I never once in 10 years came across any safe house that had any Muslim prayer materials, no Quran, nothing. There was no evidence that any Muslim lived in any of these houses that I ever went to. And they said that they did find a ton of pornography. They found video games, DVD players, stuff that would be very difficult to get in like the middle of nowhere, like the desert of the Middle East, unless you had friends in high places. And basically, and again, one of them operated in Afghanistan for 10 years and one of them operated in Iraq for 10 years. And they both said the exact same thing. They said they never came across an actual Muslim. And they said from what they could discern and what they knew from like intelligence they gathered was all these guys that were a part of these terrorist groups were basically the low IQ village idiots, where the recruiter would go into these villages, find the low IQ people who are often like criminals. They were often like the degenerates who like the outcasts, and they'd go offer them money and they'd be like, hey, do you want a job? And the guys would be like, oh yeah. And they were idiots. They were low IQ morons, and they'd recruit them with money. They'd pay them a very small amount, like $20, US dollars. And you had these guys' loyalty. And then they'd bring them in, and they, like you said, they dress them up. They do their beards. They do all that stuff, and they make them look the part. And then they hand them a gun, and they say, pose for this picture. And then it's like, oh, you see that school right there? Here's another $20. Go shoot it up. Okay. Shoot it up for money. I mean, that's basically how the game is played. and then they take that story. They hire writers to go. I'm not saying this is what the guy said. I'm saying this goes along with that movie from last night. They then hire a team of writers, and the team of writers craft this really compelling story about radicalization of these terrorists and whatever. And there's certainly threads of truth to it, because this stuff is being taught in these schools that are being funded by British oligarchs and NGOs and Western intelligence agencies. So the stuff does have a basis in reality. But would these groups be organizing to the extent that they are, and would they be as resourceful and as capable if they weren't being helped and they weren't being like marketed, and they weren't, they didn't have a team of people behind them paying for everything, giving them weapons, giving them marketing, doing PR for them, basically like a corporation behind them, like promoting them. And the answer is probably not. Like, they probably would just be a street gang, operating at a very small scale that you never heard, that we in the West would never hear about.
Yeah. Well, and I was watching Brian Berletic on the New Atlas do some coverage, and he's quite good. I do like his approach, and he was going through utilizing the State Department's own websites, going back to 2008, utilizing the Wayback Machine, how they were advertising bringing leaders of opposition groups into Washington, D.C. in 2008, still when George Bush and Dick Cheney were in power, to be schools in democracy building conferences overseen by or sponsored by the National Endowment for Democracy, Freedom House. What's the other one? The National Democratic Institute, and Facebook as well was also involved in funding these essentially brainwashing or regime change workshops for leaders from Libya, from Syria was a big one. They would just bring them to Washington. There were similar things run by the European Union as well in Scandinavian countries, where they fly these people in from the Middle East, educate them on how to use social media in order to create disruptive, maximum impact. They'd go back home. They'd get supported by things like Human Rights Watch, other NGOs, hundreds and hundreds of NGOs embedded in various countries, to give them tools to use things like corruption, which, there's corruption in every government. There's always things to complain about. But at the same time, they would use that to then amplify and manipulate the emotions of people who don't have a lot of economic opportunities. A lot of these countries have been either bombed back to the Stone Age, as we've seen with Iraq. So there's a lot of despair. They've been choked with sanctions, U.S.-led sanctions that have intentionally cut a lot of these Arab countries off from any opportunities to have economic development. We saw with the case of Afghanistan, just the theft of Afghan funds, and then the sanctioning of any country working with bad countries that are not liked by the Pentagon. So if you're on the bad list of countries that are targeted for regime change, well, they could do secondary, tertiary sanctions on any company from another country working with a company in Iran or within Syria, and in so doing, isolate that country economically. So then these people are living in poverty and squalor. They lack opportunity. And so because of that, they become much more susceptible to looking for somebody to blame. And when all of a sudden their social media, their Twitter feeds, their Facebook feeds, whatever other media that they're accessing online is telling them it's your government, it's Gaddafi, it's Mubarak, it's Bashar al-Assad. Look how corrupt they are with their nepotism. He's hired his cousin to this gig in the government. And then that would channel all of the rage, turning people individually into mobs that lose their individual sense of conscience and sense of right and wrong. And as soon as you're in a mob, that's a whole new ballgame. And then people could be mobilized to go to this protest, hold this sign. There's thousands of signs everywhere. They didn't make them, but they're all of a sudden crisp. Millions of dollars are poured into these things. Effigies of like Bashar al-Assad are being like lit on fire, and a few people are like mercenaries being sent within the crowd to like throw a Molotov cocktail, to get violent, to take some shots. Sometimes maybe take some shots at some civilians as well as some cops. And then in the chaos, then they're able to then channel and move that heightened emotional state of chaos from both the authorities as well as the people into something that would involve maximum damage, as we saw with Maidan. where something like 80 civilians, as well as a similar number of cops, were both shot by mercenaries that appear to have been brought out of Georgia that didn't care about either Ukraine as a government or the people. And we see the same thing as you showed with that graph of foreign mercenaries who don't care about Islam. They don't care about religion. They're just brought in by forces that have a lot of influence and resources from other countries to carry out regime change. So yeah, that's important to just have that dynamic in people's minds, because it's being applied in different flavors across Europe, across Eastern Europe, in Asia, big time. The Middle East is getting it heavy. Africa has gotten heavy doses of this. South America has gotten certain doses. They want to bring these techniques into the United States too. So yeah.
Well, and what Matt just said is so important for people to understand, because, you know, this idea of psy war, of psychological warfare operations, is something that has been introduced specifically to this community, like the truth community, in the past couple of years. General Flynn and Boone Cutler wrote the book 5GW, Fifth Generation Warfare, to explain what psy war is and to help people understand it. But the fact of the matter remains is that the psychological warfare operations existed 130 years ago. I think it was started before World War I. It was used in World War I. It was credited. The psychological warfare operations were credited by the Germans. The Germans said that's what won World War I for the Americans. Once the Americans got involved in 1917 and they brought their psychological warfare campaign with them, they were able to demoralize the German army into submitting, using those tactics. And so you jump forward to modern times. That's what they've been doing. Not just the intelligence community, but the military as well has been engaged in psychological warfare operations against foreign populations for decades. And you know, like, are they just fighting one another? Sometimes I kind of view the Middle East as like, it's almost like the intelligence agencies fighting the military. Now, the military has also done shameful things as well, of course. But that's almost what it is. It's like you have, like in Syria would be a perfect example. You have the CIA training and funding Al-Qaeda, training and funding ISIS through, you know, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, those groups. And then you have the military, the U.S. military there, training and funding proxies to fight those proxies. So then you basically have proxy wars happening between the CIA and their partners and the U.S. military and their partners. And caught in the middle are just the population, like the people who just want to live their life. And ultimately those people are impacted and they're forced to pick a side. And that's kind of the goal, I think, is to divide the people, get them involved, get them defecting from civilized society and wanting to, you know, believing that there's no political solution and therefore there's only a kinetic solution.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. So yeah, that definitely opens the door to just, I think, set the tone intellectually. Also, there's another point that's useful in this. I mean, well, actually, you know what? I'll just withhold, because I know you wanted to take it somewhere specific. So I'll just hold back and wait to see where you go with this.
Well, real quick, let me just show. I want to show two things. One, I want to show. Where's this guy? Give me 1 second. I thought I had this pulled up.
Well, while you're doing that,
while I'm doing that, why don't you go where you wanted to take it?
Well, I was going to go in the greater Israel ambition.
Okay.
So I don't know if that might deflate it a little bit or deflect it away a little bit. So
yeah. If you would share my screen, I found it. I'm sorry. I thought I had this tab already going. All right.
Oh, that guy.
So this is from yesterday. This is from December 9th. Morning. This 2 days ago. This is 2 days ago. This is Jim Acosta on CNN speaking to this guy.
Oh, I can't hear it.
Did I not share my? Okay. Well, so Jim Acosta is just well, here, hold on. I actually do want y'all to hear this. Stand by for processing. Stop sharing. Present. Share screen. Share audio. Yeah. Okay. We'll just do the whole thing. All right. Here we go. Can you hear that?
Hold on. Let me
Is the executive director of the Syrian emergency.
Okay. So I want everyone to hear what Jim Acosta says when he introduces this guy. Listen to the guy's name.
The story in Syria is Muaz Mustafa, excuse me. He's the executive director of the Syrian Emergency Task Force. And what was your reaction, Mr. Mustafa, when you saw these dramatic events play out over the weekend? It really was extraordinary to see.
Elation. I mean, it's very rare in a world where we see so much war, destruction, horrible people doing horrible things, and to see good triumph over evil is amazing, and to know that millions of refugees are going to go home is amazing. To know that no more Russian airstrikes.
Okay, so I just want to blow this up. So this guy's name is Mohsen Mustafa. He's the executive director of the Syrian Emergency Task Force. He is a regular contributor on CNN. Okay. All right, now I want to direct your attention to here. Now, this is an image that has circulated the internet for the past 13 years. This image specifically actually comes from a Q post where the Q entity reposted it. This is a picture of John McCain in Syria in 2011, and he is meeting with a number of people. There's a CNN news crew with him. There's actually a CNN story that goes along with this, that has like the banner at the bottom, and they're inside this room and they're all speaking in a circle. And here's Mohsen Mustafa right here, SETF, that's the Syrian Emergency Task Force, right? And you have up here Abu Musa, he's an ISIS press officer. Number 4 over here is Mohammed Noor, he's a Syrian terrorist. But right here, number 2. That is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and there's another picture of him sitting down in this room with opposite of John McCain, sitting next to Mohsen Mustafa. Here is a picture of a more recent picture of him. He was killed, of course, in that raid in 2019, October 2019, by the hero dog Conan. Everyone remembers that Trump in a dramatic moment comes out during prime time and gives addresses the nation and says Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead. He died like a dog in the cave, and what happened was Conan the dog went into the cave to get him, and he ended up detonating a suicide vest and killing himself. And the dog got hurt, but he was okay. And there are memes that came out of it of Trump giving the dog a medal that Trump retweeted, which is pretty hilarious. But yeah, so he dies. So he dies October 27, 2019. Here's another picture of him because here he's gained weight and obviously is much older than he is here. But here's another picture of him from 2004. So this is him in 2004. This is him in 2019. This is him in 2011. So you can see that is him. That these two pictures look much more similar than the one up here. But yeah, so he's the leader of ISIS. He's meeting in person with John McCain. During that same trip, this is a trip that received a lot of fanfare from Politico and CNN. And, it was John McCain and Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal. Here's Richard Blumenthal. Here's Lindsey Graham are, traveling around the Middle East and North Africa and meeting with all these freedom fighters. And man, isn't this fantastic? America is standing up for the little guy. So this guy they're meeting with, this is in Libya in 2011. This guy is Abdel Hajij Belhaj. He's from the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, which is the Al-Qaeda affiliate. And then here's the story from 2015. And it says Washington's Al-Qaeda ally now leading ISIS in Libya. And I think we may have talked about this last week, but just want to reiterate that Lindsey Graham and John McCain are meeting with these guys. They're meeting with the future leaders of ISIS, giving them money, giving them weapons, giving them encouragement. This is the guy who leads the group that kills Gaddafi later that year. And it's important to point out because it's not only is our government doing it, but our behind all this stuff, but our politicians, like the Republican Party, which a lot of people right now are caught up in the controlled opposition dynamic and rah, waving the pom-poms for Republican Party because Donald Trump just won the presidential election, the fake election, because elections can't be provably accurate right now, as a Republican candidate. And so that must mean the Republicans are the good guys, right? Even though the Republicans were the ones trying to keep Donald Trump out of the race in the first place. And they did everything they could to prevent his presidency the first time. And they did everything they could to prevent him from getting his agenda done the first time. And nothing has really changed. It's worth noting Lara Trump resigned as the head of the RNC on Monday. That's worth noting. Yeah. So, I mean, like people point to Lara Trump and they say, well, Lara Trump's in charge of the RNC, so it must be like a good thing now. She's gone now. And it's hard to imagine that, she was there for what, like 4 months, 5 months, something like that. It's hard to imagine that she was able to clean that organization out in 4 months. I highly doubt that she was able to, she did what needed to happen in order for Trump to win the election, from a narrative standpoint. And that's very important, but I don't think we should think that the Republicans are suddenly trustworthy or good guys. And to that point, I want to wrap up here is that going back to this tab, I've been saying for the past 2 weeks, ever since this all popped off like 2.5 weeks ago, that these terrorists started showing up. I speculated that this was going to be the end of neoconservatism, of Zionism, of the modern Republican Party, and of Con Inc. And here you have Ben Shapiro. And we can listen to this for a minute.
Significant human rights predations against Christians on the ground, not only in the areas controlled by Sunni terrorists, but also in the areas that were controlled by Shia terrorists. Syria is about 10% Christian. Okay, so is it about to get worse? It definitely could, which would, of course, be a terrible thing. And then you have the question of what Bashar al-Assad was doing to the country, which is killing hundreds of thousands of people, using everything up to and including chemical weapons. Well, he's gone now, and Israel has been striking a lot of the chemical weapons depots to prevent them from falling into the hands of the new rebel alliance over here.
Okay, so I just want to clarify a few things. Like, Ben Shapiro is pushing the lie that Seymour Hersh has already, he disproved that in 2016, and there's been a lot of other reporting since then that has corroborated what Seymour Hersh said in 2016, which was everyone remembers that there was like this chemical weapons attack in Aleppo, and the narrative, according to the Western media and the CIA, was that Assad gassed his own people, right? With like sarin, I think it was sarin gas they said he used. Well, Seymour Hersh came out with a Substack article later that year, dug deep into it, and basically using just logical thinking and reasoning, based on the facts that were being given to us narratively by these liars in the media and the CIA, the sarin gas that was used could only have come from the CIA. Like, the CIA was the only one capable of producing the specific chemical that had been used in that attack. And the speculation that maybe it had come from some sort of a plant that existed in the desert in the Middle East was complete bullshit. There was no way that was possible. It had to have come from a facility that would have been ultimately supervised by the CIA. And therefore the weapons were this was before Trump won the election in 2016. So therefore the weapons were most likely given to, the attack was obviously not done by Assad. It was done by ISIS, and to frame Assad. And they were most likely given to the ISIS by Obama, who was openly supporting the quote unquote freedom fighters who were trying to overthrow Assad. Now you have Shapiro pushing the exact same lie, like rehashing the lie, just like he does very, very often with the very fine people hoax, the Charlottesville lie about Trump. He does this all the time. But he also goes on in this video to say that yes, the Christian minority in Syria, which used to be a majority, but no longer is going to be killed. Like, yes, these people are going to be slaughtered. Yes, these people who just took over are going to go into these towns, and the first thing they're going to do is go chop off the heads of the priests. Yes, that's going to happen. But you know what? It's still a good thing, because Israel's enemies are weakened. Because Assad is Netanyahu's enemy. Netanyahu says that. And so therefore, it doesn't matter if these Christians are dying. Ultimately, this is a net positive.
Yeah.
Which just goes to show that this is where their priorities are. They do not care. They don't value human life. This is not about religion. Like, they want to push the whole paradigm. This is about the Christian Judeo-West versus Islam. Yeah. Bullshit. Because they are perfectly happy to kill Jews in Israel. They're perfectly happy to kill Christians in Syria. They do not care. They will kill as many people as they need to kill in order to get their agenda done.
Yeah. I would just say on that point, this is the virulent evil that came in and was infused into the Republican Party, in the form of, people should be reminded of this a little bit. The neoconservatives are not typical conservatives, right? The neoconservatives are this mutant, this virus that was incubated during the Cold War that was infused into the Republican Party that had been traditionally, historically, the party of Abraham Lincoln and McKinley. So what happened? Why did that get destroyed? Right. So the thing that took over, especially it started coming into official positions of real power in a virulent way with the figures around Zbigniew Brzezinski in the 70s, especially with the Trilateral Commission, where Zbigniew was bringing in this new grouping of people who had been former Trotskyists, followers of Leon Trotsky in their youth. Then they became disciples directly under this figure named Leo Strauss. And here I'm referring to Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, Paul Nitze, all of these creatures, Donald Rumsfeld. You want me to, what do you want to show there?
Real quick, I just want to point this out just to wrap up my point is the Syrian Emergency Task Force, which is basically the PR firm for ISIS, the PR arm of ISIS. Here's the key people: Mohsen Mustafa, the guy you just saw on screen, executive director. The headquarters, it was founded in 2011, and the headquarters is in Washington, D.C., USA.
Of course it is.
It's an effing NGO.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a 501c3 organization established in March 2011 to support the Syrian opposition, to support ISIS. Okay, so
yeah. Well, that actually brings up directly what I was saying, because a lot of this whole technique of controlling the world and carrying out regime change through NGOs as a cover was inaugurated by the Trilateral Commission in the 70s. And this is when Zbigniew Brzezinski, and he had an assistant in 1975 named Samuel P. Huntington, who was a follower of Bernard Lewis, a British imperial thinker who, created what's known as the arc of crisis ideology to destabilize America's and Britain's enemies, which were, Russia, China, potentially India, by keeping this whole zone known as the arc of crisis, which is basically right here, the Arab nations, in a state of constant turmoil to weaken the soft underbelly of Eurasia, to prevent the dangerous formation of a potential Eurasian partnership. So that's when the idea came about to say, okay, well, we've been doing this thing already under the CIA and covert operations and Green Berets and what have you since the earliest days of the Cold War, but people are wisening up to it. They're starting to get a sense of how this works. So they're like, well, okay, let's expand and rebrand, which Zbigniew did in the form of these democracy building conferences that were set up in Kyoto as one of the headquarters of the Trilateral Commission in the 70s. And they basically called for Project Democracy, which was essentially create civilian nominally front groups that would be NGOs that would promote human rights, that would promote other things, and that could be seeded into countries funded by taxpayer money, but also private philanthropy, Rockefeller funding, Carnegie Foundation funding, other things that are private, just because people just have a big heart with a lot of money, and they want to put it to good work. So that was where you had the like I was mentioning, all of these Straussians, these followers of Leo Strauss, who were brought in by Zbigniew Brzezinski to manage a big purge of U.S. intelligence. This was in the form of the Team B. There's something called Team B in 1977, 78, 79. That was a grouping of these Straussians that Zbigniew basically said, okay, you're going to go in, you're going to write a report on Afghanistan and the Soviet Union specifically, and what are the ambitions of the Soviet Union, because American intelligence officials had formerly been too influenced by the idea that we can work in harmony with nations that might be ideologically in odds with capitalism. And so a lot of people, a lot of patriots within the American intelligence community were still animated by the thinking of Bobby Kennedy, of John F. Kennedy, that we could find points of win-win cooperation based on economic development with Russia, with China. And that was no longer acceptable. So Team B was brought in to write a countervailing report trying to posit, without proving anything, but just positing that Russia was an expansionist nation that wanted to have a global Soviet superstate with China to lord over the freedom and democracy loving West. And by imposing that ambition, that intention onto Russia, they were able to then overthrow to basically result. The result was a massive purge where the old guard of the CIA that was still active within the national intelligence estimate, within that community, that was overseeing the CIA's intelligence gathering were ousted. And you had like this massive 1,000-member purge of the American intelligence. And this group came in and they were like, okay, let's suck the Soviet Union into their own Vietnam War. And they're the ones who oversaw this. Now they still had some influence under Reagan. Reagan tried to hold them back, but they were still there running things like Iran-Contra. They were still there preparing the groundwork for the continuity of government program that Dick Cheney and Richard Pearl later on like really amplified with 9/11. But when they came out with their clean break doctrine, so they'd already in the 90s were incubating and preparing their takeover, their revenge, in the form of drafting the clean break doctrine that called for, a program for Benjamin Netanyahu to begin a new program of regime changing nations that were standing in the way of greater Israel. They were able to, and they literally call Syria right after Iraq. Syria is the next on the list. Libya is on that list. Iran's the big trophy. They're all on that list for target. Lebanon's on that list.
Yemen, yeah.
Yemen.
I think it's Sudan. Is it Sudan, Yemen, Libya? I think that's the list. Yeah. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, and this is basically what Benjamin Netanyahu this is like his raison d'etre. He's promoting this greater Israel idea that they're pushing to secure the realm of the Arabs that have been living there. I think our audience is pretty familiar with this, that stretches far beyond the borders of Israel. Now, Strauss was a guy, it's really important to be aware of who this Leo Strauss was that shaped the thinking of this virus. Because again, you got to look at the ideology of what is the thing that took over the Republicans and shaped things like 9/11. Who would come up with something so disgusting that they would kill their own people, blame it on groups in Afghanistan to justify shock and awe, and then blame it on people who had nothing to do with it in Iraq to justify destroying that country for the sake of greater Israel? Like what are these crusaders? And Seymour Hersh correctly in 2004 identified them as the new crusaders, because they really do have the same ethos and paradigm of the original Templar Heights, Hospitaller ideologues, the Teutonic Knights, that saw usefulness in telling lies to the masses, to the dumb idiots that would then give themselves over to becoming mercenaries in forever wars that would only benefit a small clique of elites above the show who would never get their hands dirty in the actual bloodletting. So that was what was done 1,000 years ago to sick, Christianity against Islam and against Judaism and have a forever clash of civilizations. That's what Zbigniew Brzezinski revived with Samuel P. Huntington and Bernard Lewis with the Ark of Crisis and the Clash of Civilizations. That was the name given to this program by Huntington. And so Leo Strauss, this guy is a fascist. He's a friend of Carl Schmitt, the Nazi crown jurist in the 1930s. He's having correspondences with Carl Schmitt. He's a friend of Martin Heidegger, the official Nazi SS philosopher who promoted the idea of thrownness, that nobody is morally accountable for their actions in life because we're all just thrown into the world and all we can do is adapt to the standards and norms of society that we're born into, as if we have no conscience, right? That's all we are, is adaptive blank slates. So that guy's a friend of Leo Strauss. Leo Strauss is I think he's Hungarian, but he's basically a Jewish fascist, a nihilist, doesn't believe in anything except power. And he's brought in through a Rockefeller scholarship to the London School of Economics. He becomes a student of Harold Lasky, the head of the Fabian Society, who then sends him to Chicago, or first to New York, and then Chicago, where he spends 40 years building up generations of young ideologues, followers, around the idea that there's a secret doctrine that he taught that only the elite can know, that Plato, that you can read in a coded way within the Bible or within the Platonic dialogues. And that code, he says, that only the elite can know is that that we must create sacred myths to shape the minds and emotions of the masses around the analogy of Plato's cave, and that we elites must become the puppet masters. If people know, we've talked about this on our show before, the shadow puppet masters casting shadows onto the cave wall of book 7 of Plato's cave allegory from the Republic. He's like, that's what the true philosopher is, the person who has the strength to know that evil is necessary for the good, because the good is stability. It's not a positive principle. It's simply the absence of change, stability, stasis, control. All of these guys are control freaks. So that's what he defines as the good. And because that's the good, any type of change that human beings do when they aspire to make a discovery, make life better for themselves, that becomes disruptive and thus evil. And thus the only way to destroy those types of evils is to do evil. You know, and he talks about the necessity of war, the necessity of uniting people around a common threat. He also says human beings are wicked by their nature. And because they're wicked, they're incapable of self-governing. So we have to create the illusion of democracy and create the need of constant fear and threat from abroad in order to keep people in a state of constant vigilance and thus malleability to acquiesce to what the elites who control the shadows would like. And that's Leo Strauss in a nutshell. Now, these people took over. They're the ones who had this idea of creating, following the thinking of Schmidt, the guy the Nazi crown jurist who justified Hitler becoming a dictator through his enabling acts in 1933. That's Nazi crown jurist Carl Schmitt, who developed the unitary executive. That's at the heart of the Project 2025 that Trump has denounced. It's this unitary executive ideology of Nazi crown jurist Schmitt that then said, okay, we have to create a crisis, burn down our own parliament building, blame it on a foreign enemy. It was actually the SS that did it. And then declare, martial law and forever control, which will just tell people is a temporary thing. That was what was done by Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld under the Emergency Acts that expanded the whole security dragnet and the forever wars. And yeah, like that's there today being revived around this whole thing that you're describing that Lara Trump was trying to rein in, but obviously there's limits to what she could do because this thing is pervasive. This is the Liz Cheney, Lindsey Graham thing. And yeah, they'll just use the illusion, the image of democracy with none of the substance.
Yeah, well, I mean, you touched on something really important there. The idea of creating a mythology, of creating myths, storytelling. This is what they were talking about on Story Hour last night. Is that basically in that movie, which is very meta and it's very like directly explained to the audience in a very direct manner by like the leader of the umbrella corporation who controls all the media, basically, is he's just like, we have to tell stories. We tell stories, and the whole movie is about like storytelling and creating false narratives in order to manipulate and control the minds of the populations. And that's what it's all about. It's not just television. It's everything. I mean, now, like you extrapolate it out, it's the internet, it's social media, it's every facet of what we would say is our perceived reality, and using all of those, recognizing all of those elements as tools that can be used as instruments to help craft this reality and make it more believable and make it more real, quote unquote, in the minds of the people. And then that allows them to subscribe to it even further. And then you can tell these stories, you can create these characters, and you can basically you can steer society, because you can basically say, well, this guy's a bad guy, so therefore nobody should like him or support him. This guy's a good guy. It's what they try to do to Donald Trump. It's how they try to destroy Donald Trump, is by telling everyone that he was a bad guy and crafting, really, really poorly crafted lies about him. It also made me realize as I was listening to them talk, I was like, man, that's kind of what I do on the news brief. Is I kind of do like counter propaganda. We kind of do that here. Is like we do storytelling. We tell stories about history, and it's not about us being right. It's not about us. All history is interpretation. That's what I always say, and I think that's accurate, even including our version of it. But it's about getting people to understand that they should be defecting from the central narrative, and recognizing that there are possible alternative theories or alternative explanations for these things that are just as plausible, in many cases more plausible than what we're being told. And they should absolutely indulge those theories and look into the information for themselves and decide for themselves what is truth and what is not. And getting back to the very first point you made about what Brzezinski was doing, and kind of tying it all together, There was a movie that Hollywood came out with years ago called Charlie Wilson's War.
Oh yeah,
which was Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
And they basically whitewashed that whole Afghanistan thing, and they it was the one scene that I remember from the entire movie. Basically, the movie explains like how did we actually like get involved in the Middle East, and it's like it all started because this drunk congressman played by Tom Hanks, was looking for a talking point to get for his reelection, and he found this kind of obscure program to fund the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. And, one thing led to another. And before you know it, we're fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan. And oh no, these guys became Al-Qaeda. Who saw that coming? And it's all summarized by Philip Seymour Hoffman towards the end, where he's like a political consultant in the film. And he tells like the anecdote that I'm sure people have heard before about, the old wives' tale about the horse that is sick. And everyone's like, oh, how terrible. We'll see. Well, now everyone goes off to battle and the sick horse stays behind and he doesn't die. Oh, what? That's great. We'll see. And then the son rides the horse and breaks his leg. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, we'll see. Another war. Everyone goes off and dies. The son doesn't. Oh, well, so it kind of is like everything that you like, causality is basically the summary there. Like everything you do is going to cause something else to happen, and you can't possibly like anticipate the next thing that's going to happen. We're basically just nihilists chasing cars and traffic, and there's no way to have a vision and plan long term because every single move we make is going to branch off into infinite possibilities, and who knows what's going to happen next. And it's all just to kind of whitewash the fact that the CIA created and British intelligence created radical Islamic terrorism. And whoops, sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I know. And people, I think we're so attached to some of these bigger stories that we may not even be aware of. And you're right, like everything is interpretation, and it's always a question of intention. Like, are you interpreting something with a heart that's tuned to honesty? Do you love people? Like, do you love yourself? Do you love God? Do you love humanity? Because if you do, then you're going to craft your poetry. You're going to craft your stories in such a manner that you're going to help people make discoveries about universals, like universal attributes about the nature of reality, the nature of themselves, that make them more empowered, more sovereign, more self-examining, more capable of acting with power for the good, in terms of like having experienced that type of composition that has been behind, let's say, a Christopher Marlowe production of the Jew of Malta, or Faustus, Dr. Faustus, which will give people, if they're sensitive to it, a much greater insight into the nature of the structure of evil, what evil uses to capitalize upon our weaknesses in order to make us our own enemy, the cause of our own self-annihilation. You see it also in Homer's works within the Odyssey and the Iliad. Like there's empowering universal lessons. You see it in Christ's sermons as well, and just his beautiful allegorical moral lessons regarding the Good Samaritan and other things. Like they're poetic stories, but they contain within them these amazing universal lessons that will make you more capable of navigating through disinformation, being guided by your conscience. So it's like, yeah, it's stories, but they're stories tied to natural law versus the oligarchy stories, which will usually detach us from an ability to react in reality and tie us ever more into an addiction to consuming sensual experiences from the shadows in the cave that we become more immersed into, and we lose a sense of the higher reality that our mind's eye, guided by conscience, can actually interface with. If we're feeding that hunger. If we're not feeding that, we're feeding the lower hungers, which is what they do when they build up all of their weaponized mobs, whether it's in Georgia or Ukraine or Arab Spring. They're feeding young people especially with a sense of look, the life can be easier for you, where they're going to you could have cupcakes. They come out with like baked goods and cookies, like Victoria Nuland, or in Georgia, you got these NGOs coming out with like sweets and chocolates and cakes for young people. If you just get rid of this government, then you'll have sweets and goodies. And it's appealing to the laziest, slobbiest quality of the human condition, but that's what they then associate is what is tied to the revolution. If you just go off and fight the the Muslims in the Crusades. You know, you're going to have a life of glory and honor for you and your kids, and Jesus will be happy with you. And thousands of people, countless, went and devoted themselves to sacrificing their lives for unnecessary wars where they died in the deserts of Arabia, in the whatever 8 Crusades. And sorry.
It's like Hansel and Gretel. I mean, like what you're describing is like Hansel and Gretel. It's like, hello, my pretties, like come here and eat these cupcakes, and we're gonna and come into my little cabin right here, and then I'm gonna put you in the oven and eat you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, but I mean, on that note, there's a couple points before I guess we shift to Georgia. But I just want to point out something on Hamas. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the current leader of Hamas, Khaled Maashal, he currently gave his congratulations to the Syrian people for overthrowing. That's him right there, overthrowing the butcher Assad and expelling the Russians. That's the head of Hamas, who took over when Ismail Haniyeh was killed in Iran. Haniyeh seems to be a mixed bag, but this guy, again, another billionaire Hamas leader based in Qatar.
Yep. Well, expelled from Qatar recently. He was expelled
from Qatar. Yeah.
Expelled from Qatar. Yeah. Like after Trump met with the emir from Qatar, which I thought
that's very interesting. Yeah.
I thought that was very interesting that he went back and he was like, all right, y'all get your stuff and get out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. But yes, that's a really, really good point. Keep going. I don't know if you're still going, but
I'll just say one last thing. So a lot of people who have been just championing in an overly cheerleader fashion the axis of resistance against evil Israel Hamas has been treated, I think, like in an overly glorified manner by a lot of very otherwise smart people who I think have been a little bit foolish over the past year, especially since October 7th, because they're seeing finally people brave enough to stand up to Israel. No, I would say that this is a good reminder that those ideologues who created Hamas, who are managing Hamas, actually are working for the benefit ultimately of greater Israel, because the only people who benefited, or the only agenda which really benefited in a weird way after October 7th of last year, was those Zionists who wanted greater Israel, because they got the excuse they needed to begin the reactivation of clean break that had been kind of dormant for a number of years by going in now finally purging the Gaza. There's probably well over 100,000 people that have been killed. I think official numbers are like 50,000, but probably much more than that. Point being is that gave them the spark plug, and now that group that is supposedly anti-Israel, and I mean, this guy Khaled, he's chastising Israel currently for invading, which they've done, Syria a little bit since Bashar al-Assad has been toppled. Yeah, he's doing that, but at the same time, he's celebrating the toppling of Assad. He's celebrating the ouster of the Russians. He's effectively doing everything which is only benefiting. Oh, wait, this is something you wrote? Netanyahu?
Well, yeah, this is a perfect segue. Like you could not have set that up any better, because that's exactly what I wanted to wrap up with before we go to Georgia. One thing that nobody is talking about, which I wrote about today in the news brief, is that Netanyahu has been in court all week with his corruption trial, which these are charges that were brought back in 2019. My personal theory, that I don't have like sauce to support this, but my personal theory, based on just rhetoric that I've seen Trump say since 2019, is that somehow Trump was involved in getting these charges brought against Netanyahu. And the charges are relatively low-hanging fruit. I mean, we're talking about like receiving lavish gifts, cigars, champagne, embezzlement, like they did a submarine deal and Netanyahu was like skimming off the top. Stuff that you would absolutely expect a career politician, a guy who's been in politics since the 1970s and who's been prime minister off and on since 1996 to probably be involved in. Netanyahu's incredulous, and as I write here, I kind of understand why he's incredulous, because I imagine that there's a lot of other politicians in Israel and America doing the same thing he's doing, and he's kind of like, what the hell, guys? You're throwing me under the bus, but you're all doing the same thing. And then there's also probably the element of all the things I've done in my career, this is what's going to bring me down, is this silly kind of low-hanging corruption, like this low-hanging fruit. But I wanted to bring up what you pointed out about the illegal occupation. So we've talked about the Golan Heights before. The Golan Heights is this area right here. It's technically part of Syria. It's like the most southwest portion of Syria. on the border of Israel. It was occupied by Israel, by the IDF in the 6-Day War in 1967, and they've been there ever since. There's a demilitarized part that's like in between the Golan Heights and Syria, where neither Syria or the IDF are supposed to go. And now Netanyahu has ordered the IDF to go in there and start seizing that land. And this is a map showing of the stuff as of 2 days ago. This is what they have taken so far. I've seen a multi-phase map where eventually they're gonna, which I don't have here, but Netanyahu says the illegal occupation of Syrian land is forever. He's like, we're not leaving. This isn't temporary. This is our land now. And then you have Israel Katz, who was formerly the foreign minister. Now he's the defense minister. This is the guy who threatened Erdogan with Saddam Hussein. He's like, you saw what happened to Saddam Hussein, Erdogan. You better watch your mouth when you talk about Israel. He's now saying that they want to create a sterile zone in southern Syria. There's a map out there that shows multi-phases, like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I couldn't source whether or not it actually came from anything authoritative, so I don't think it's really worth looking at, but it does show eventually phase 3 occupying Damascus and most of southern Syria. And then I saw someone in the chat mention like the patches. Like, yes, there's the picture. There's the picture I'm sure many people have seen of this map alongside of the patch that's on certain units in the IDF wear a patch that have this outline on there. And as far as I can tell, that photograph is real. But this is what we mean when we say Greater Israel, is this map right here. So, and the Euphrates River. So the Golan Heights is this thing right here where I have my mouse. And then they're starting to now take the land right here. And what Israel Katz is saying is that they want to establish a sterile zone in southern Syria to prevent terrorist activities, like terrorist threats from emerging. And I'm like, you mean like the terrorist threat that you just hired to overthrow Assad? Damascus is right here where my mouse is. That's the capital of Syria. So obviously the sterile zone is going to encompass Damascus, which Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, said a month back in October. Damascus is part of Israel. So
yes, he said that. He said that explicitly. Really,
he explicitly. I have the headline right here. He explicitly said that. There's a video of it. It was part of a documentary that somebody. This is October 11th, 2024. There's a documentary that somebody was making about him, and they released a clip of him in the documentary. He's speaking in Hebrew, but they have captions, and it says that. The borders of Syria or of Israel extend far beyond where we have it right now. Damascus is part of Israel. So that just confirms all the speculation that this is all about establishing Greater Israel.
Yeah, I would. So let's not even go to Georgia yet, because there's actually a few more things to unpack on this point. Okay. There's actually so one thing that I thought was interesting was a little video that was recorded from Gaddafi in 2008, warning Bashar al-Assad and other leaders of the Arab League of what exactly is happening or what is going to happen. The other thing is an actual fanatic settler just speaking about Greater Israel that I thought it was useful just to see how she's putting her thoughts of how to maintain this Greater Israel ambition in the young. How she worded it regarding the need to brainwash the young and brainwash ourselves.
Can I guess her name? Is it Daniela Weiss?
Possibly. Let's go. Let's see. But first, let's listen to Gaddafi. This is 50 seconds, and then she speaks for about a minute. So let's just listen to both those things. So Gaddafi first, speaking at the Arab League 2008. This is gold.
ممكن الدور جاي عليكم كلكم. نعم. ليش ما يكون فيها
Why won't there be an investigation into the killing of Saddam Hussein? For anybody listening and they don't see what's being read. People are just smiling. America fought alongside Saddam Hussein against Khomeini. He was their friend. Cheney was a friend of Saddam Hussein. Rumsfeld, the U.S. Defense Secretary at the time, was destroyed. Iraq was destroyed. Was a close friend of Saddam Hussein. Ultimately, they sold him out and hanged him. You are friends of America. Let's say that we are not you. But one of these days, America may hang us. And before that, he was saying it could be any one of you next. And it's a longer video as well that people can get the whole thing. It's like 10 minutes long. Very poignant warning, very insightful, because Gaddafi was one of the serious leaders who would be able to really keep Al-Qaeda at bay, while at the same time recognized how the whole what Samuel P. Huntington and all of these creeps were saying was actually real. A lot of these Arab leaders were in denial for some reason, even after the bombing of Iraq, and couldn't take this seriously. And it seems, even Bashar al-Assad at the time was still grimacing when the video was shown on his face listening to Gaddafi, as if he didn't quite believe what Gaddafi was saying. But it became very real. And what you got there is, I guess what is this?
This is it's worth looking at this before we go to the next one. This is the sentencing hearing for Saddam Hussein in 2006. It's subtitled. So everyone watch what Saddam Hussein does here. This is when I saw this, sometime in the past year, and it blew my mind when I saw this. I have it sped up a little bit so we can get through it, and we won't watch the whole thing. Maybe I'll skip through it. We'll see.
ظل واقف نترك قرار الحكم ظل واقف نترك قرار الحكم استمع إلى قرار المحكمة واقفا
أي واقفا كن واقفا. He says no, I'm sitting down. I'm not going to stand up.
قررت المحكمة
Court has decided
الحكم على المدان صدام حسين المجيد بالإعدام شنقا حتى الموت لارتكاب عمد كجريمة ضد الإنسانية وفق المادة.
I'm going to silence it so I can say it. He says, long live the people, long live the nation, down with the invaders. God is great. 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 He just keeps repeating that. God is great. And I know he says other stuff. Long live the people. Long live the Arab nation. Down with the collaborators. Down with the invaders. Go to hell, you in the court. Screw you in the court. Because they're sitting here telling him we're about to kill you. He says, we are the people of humanity and the criminal invaders.
Yeah.
They are the enemies of humanity. I advise the great Iraqi people to forgive all those that betrayed those who takes back his stance. I advise our great people not to resent the people of the countries that aggressed against Iraq, and to open his chest to pardon. You are not the decision makers. You are cowards. You are servants for colonialism and the invaders. God is great. God is great. Life is for us and death is for our enemies. Life to the people and death to the enemies. Life to the glorious Arab nation and death to its enemies. Life to humanity. And so what he's saying there is, he says, my advice to the Iraqi people is do not hold basically the American people responsible for this. They don't know what they're doing. Which, I mean, the first thing I thought of when he said that is I thought of Jesus when Jesus was being crucified, and he says, my Father, do forgive them. They know not what they do. And for him to be sitting there as they're saying, we're going to kill you now. Like you're going to die. We're going to hang you. And he's saying, do not blame the American people. It's the decision makers at the top who are doing this. And it's the traitors in my government who are the collaborators. So that blew my mind. I'm like, okay, well, obviously we've been lied to about Saddam Hussein.
Yeah. Well, that it blows listening to just basic little evidence like this, like direct experiences of somebody eloquently just speaking their soul at a time when they know they're about to die. This breaks the governing myth that the Western oligarchy has been trying to capitalize on, these Straussians, by promoting the idea, because the way that they've been doing this, they've been working on America's egos by saying, look, they took something true and then they perverted it. The true thing being that America is an exceptional nation. That is true. That is true. The city on the hill of, as John Winthrop said, that is true. However, they then took that and then amplified it to the point of irrational pride, to the point that they ignored the aspect that made America great. Because what made America great was that it was not an empire. It was not based upon a nation whose greatness was founded upon power projection or exploiting the weak. That was not it. It was based on a rejection of that. And instead, it was based upon the principle that all human beings are created in the living image of God. And as such, we have to formulate our entire construct of society and our ambitions, our priorities around that new idea, not of a hereditary right to rule, of elite overlords and their hereditary masters. No, none of that. So they said, okay, we can turn America into a Pax Romana, Pax Americana, a new Roman Empire. And we'll say, okay, we have to spread our democracy by military force if necessary, so that we can homogenize the world so that they are like us. This became like the Borgs from Star Trek, right? At the end of the day, with a little bit more of like an emotional righteousness associated with it. Now, that involves assuming that people are subhuman who need to be made better by having that power projection of democracy imposed onto them because they're inferior culturally, genetically, whatever. They're just inferior without that exceptional imposition. And that's what justified 800 American military bases spread out all over the world today. You don't justify that easily. That's a hard thing to sell. So that was done by this idea, okay, people are barbarians, the Arabs are barbarians, the Muslims are barbarians, and so we have to make them human. Maybe that might involve killing people along the way who don't want to accept the higher, truth, but so be it. There's a higher truth that justifies this evil. That's good. So evil justifying good never works. But they did it. Now, again, when you actually read the thought, or like read the transcripts or listen to the remarks of the best of the Muslims throughout history, you realize, no, they actually are tapping into the exact same universal truths that are embedded also within the Christian matrix of loving your enemy, loving God, forgiveness. That's there. The Christian matrix, just like the Islamic matrix, has weaknesses within it that could be capitalized upon by the enemies of both Islam and Christianity. But there's the same universal high truths that have been, making the oligarchy afraid, which is why they had to do the Crusades 1,000 years ago in the first place, was because before the Crusades, you actually had a couple of centuries of beautiful ecumenical relationships of cooperation between Charlemagne's Carolingian Christian Empire and the Muslim, dynasty of Harun al-Rashid and his grandson and son and his father and grandfather. You had these Renaissance dynamics of cooperation, collaboration amongst these great faiths that brought in Confucians from China and Buddhists from China working on win-win trade cooperation through the Silk Road corridors. You had Jews involved in diplomacy, working to create their aspect of the Renaissance. We've talked about Khazaria. That all came in to this dynamic. And this is what the old patrician oligarchs of the occult, underworld of the oligarchy is centered in the Vatican, centered in Venice. In some of them had branches in Constantinople. They were working together to destroy that by taking these allies of different faiths and finding a way to just get them to kill each other and forget that period of Renaissance dynamic that threatened the oligarchy. And that's what they're trying to do again today, because they know that if we actually just listen to the words of people, even Saddam Hussein, right? The person who's been made synonymous with the devil in most people's mind. Or look at example here. I just pulled this up. Osama bin Laden, right? Now, this guy is definitely a tool in many ways, but listen to what this guy was saying, right? I would like right after 9/11, he comes out and he gives the one time we have some recording of this guy. He says, I would like to assure the world that I did not plan the recent attacks, which seem to have been planned by people for personal reasons. I have been living in the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan and following its leader's rules. The current leader does not allow me to exercise such operations because, yeah. And then he said, I have already said that I am not involved in the 11th of September attacks in the United States. As a Muslim, I try my best to avoid telling a lie. Neither I had any knowledge of these attacks, nor I consider the killing of innocent women, children, and other humans as an appreciable act. Islam strictly forbids causing harm to innocent women, children, and other people. I have already said that we are against the American system, not against its people, whereas in these attacks, the common American people have been killed. The United States should try to trace the perpetrators of these attacks within itself, the people who are a part of the U.S. system, but are dissenting against it, or those who are working for some other system, persons who want to make the present century as a century of conflict between Islam and Christianity so that their own civilization, nation, country, or ideology could survive. Then there are intelligence agencies in the U.S. which require billions of dollars worth of funds from the Congress and the government every year, they need an enemy. And this is what Osama bin Laden said on September 28th, 2001. Very clearly not taking ownership of that thing and making the point that if we want to know who the real owner is, and saying that I'm not against the American people should really do their job and look at the intelligence agencies in America who are out to kill them if they want to know what's really going on. He's just explicitly stating that. And then he goes, it goes dark. We have no idea what the hell happens. It goes dark. And a year later, he crops up apparently dead. Who knows if he died before that? Probably did. No idea.
There's a lot. There's a lot of evidence that he died within whatever, a few years after 9/11 of dialysis or something. So
because the other story is that he was sitting on a Pakistani military base overseen by the Americans when they went in with a team of like Navy SEALs and Green Berets, and then that's weird. Like he's like playing video games or some dude was playing video games, and then they threw his body over the ship in the middle of the ocean to ensure that nobody would be able to like pay homage to his body. So you threw his body overboard because it's sacrilege to Islam? That's a weird story. But like, don't take any pictures of him and like release it so that everyone will believe your story, right? I mean, that it does it just doesn't make any sense. Nothing that they did made any sense. And it's like if you were going to take down the most notorious villain at the time in the world, you would think that they would want to have enough proof that the world would believe the story that they're trying to sell. But they did make a movie. But they did make a movie about it, and so when that happens, it's got to be real. Absolutely. Yeah. Now it's a sacred myth. Yeah, exactly. Sacred myth. That's the word. Yeah. Yeah. So I think right now, like people are, obviously there's, we don't know exactly everything that went on behind. We don't know much of anything. There's still a big veil of confusion behind what were the decisions that resulted in this having happened of Syria falling. We do know that there's a lot of instability. Like we know that in Jordan, there's a big concern. There's only like 14 million people living in Jordan, but 1.5 million of them have been Syrian refugees, enemies of Assad. Another 1 million refugees in Jordan are from Iraq. A lot of them affiliated with Al-Qaeda. That's causing the Jordanian government cause for nervousness, because now they're not all going back to Syria or Iraq. And the current leader of what's his name, the former head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Mohsen Rezaei, he gave a speech yesterday warning of intelligence that on American bases in Syria, there were 11,000 ISIS troops being trained and prepared to launch an attack against Iraq. Iraq's still a very weak government. So with Syria out of action right now, this makes them much more vulnerable. And if this is true, these different U.S. bases on the border of Iraq in Syria, if the Iranians are correct on this, that could cause a major destabilization, if not toppling of Iraq. We know that Israel would still take advantage of a lot of those things to spread their thing. I don't know about Saudi Arabia or Egypt as far as like what's the Muslim Brotherhood deep state structures that have been kept at bay. Pretty much. I know Saudi Arabia's done a pretty good job. Egypt still has kept them at bay, but I don't know how much danger there is of them being able to capitalize on this and flare up the case again within Egypt. I don't know if that's a thing. That's something to look for. But definitely Jordan and Iraq are very, very nervous. And then you have the case of Georgia above as well, which seems to be a bit of a police clampdown on the protests that have been going on for 12 days. Some of them were getting very violent, smelling like the Maidan. It seems like that's been put at bay a little bit, but I don't really know. Did you want to say anything more about the Middle East, or did you want to go to Georgia? Or no, I think it's probably time. Let's go to Georgia. Okay. And let's see. We can kind of talk about that. And I will say, let's just transition. Because you're right. Right now, the question that's being asked, I think, everywhere is who's next? Who's going to be the next victim of Israel? Like, which victim is going to be next? Jordan makes the most sense. Although the argument could be made that they already have the Hashemites living in fear for their life, given what they did to their cousins in Iraq back in the 1950s.
where they cut off their heads and their hands and their feet, and they strung their bodies up and killed the women and children in the courtyard. That was when the Ba'athist Party took over Iraq. So yeah, I mean, Jordan or Iraq are probably the next logical step. The reason, so everyone understands, the reason that Syria, this is a really important moment for Syria to fall right now, is because it cuts off the land bridge between Iran and Lebanon. So now Hezbollah, which operates out of southern Lebanon, and Hezbollah, as we discussed last week, is the reason that Assad didn't fall initially. They're the ones who kept all of this stuff at bay until the Russians got there, and then were able to basically really establish a counteroffensive, or a defense at least. They're now completely isolated down here in Lebanon, and they're going to be forced to, unless Russia uses its ships, because it does have ship. It's still the MSM is saying that the Russian ships have left the port up here in Syria, up in Tartus. But Lavrov's come out and said, no, we haven't. Our ships are still there in Tartus, and we're not leaving. So unless Russia starts using their ships to supply Hezbollah is basically going to have to either sue for peace, like surrender to the IDF. And I think what that's going to look like is it's going to look like an Israeli settlement being established in southern Lebanon, and probably Hezbollah leaders being thrown in prison, I would imagine. But that's why that's important, is that now Lebanon is cut off from Iran, and they can't get Hezbollah can't fight the IDF anymore. And we can debate whether or not that's a good thing. It's not, who knows? But the point is that I do think that very quickly we're going to see an Israeli settlement established in southern Lebanon. And then what happens to Jordan? That's going to be, first we'll probably see the West Bank fall, and then Jordan potentially. So this is, of course, assuming that this isn't all thwarted, but that seems to be the path forward. Is they're going to expand their operations to Damascus. They're going to incorporate southern Lebanon. They're going to take over the West Bank, which they already have, and then they're going to start eating away at Jordan. But now
there's already shooting between HTS and Hezbollah on the border of Lebanon already. That's between Syria and Lebanon, so that's already beginning. We see little inflammations there.
There you go. So it's and you can be sure that the Uniparty is going to be backing HTS against Hezbollah for sure.
Yeah.
So let's move up to Georgia, which again is not that far away. I mean, you're talking about a country. So Syria is on the border of Turkey. I think it actually has the largest. It has the largest border. It does have the largest border with Turkey. And now we're going to go to Turkey's northern border, Georgia. So not that far away. And there are pipelines that run from Baku to Turkey that go through Georgia. So Georgia is important. They intentionally go around Armenia, which I've noticed. I don't know if that's because of the mountains or if that's because Armenia is there's something special about Armenia, but the pipelines all go around Armenia into Turkey through Georgia. And Georgia, for those who don't remember, Robert Fico was he's the Slovakian prime minister. Slovakia is up here. So you got Slovakia right here. So Robert Fico, the prime minister of Slovakia, gets elected last fall or last winter or whatever, takes office, passes legislation, which is basically a carbon copy of Russian legislation in Russia that says foreign NGOs have to publicly publish their sources of funding, which would have, of course, undermined the CIA's ability to operate in the country. That then leads to Robert Fico, the prime minister, being shot 5 times in the chest back on May 15th of this year. And then in the immediate aftermath, another prime minister who was elected at the same time as Robert Fico, the prime minister of Georgia, he is in the process of, at the time, passing similar legislation in Georgia for these NGOs. And a European Union MP calls him, member of parliament calls him and says, hey, you saw what happened to Fico, right? Like, you might be next. You better watch yourself. And now we've had color revolution in Georgia, a coup going on in Georgia all year, basically. And now it's reaching a fever pitch. It's reaching the Maidan revolution, like the revolution that happened in Ukraine in 2014. It's reaching that level. now where there's violence in the streets. The media claims that it's being attacked by the government, which doesn't make any sense. And the reason this is happening now is because a few weeks ago, I think it was either late October or maybe early November, they had an election in Georgia. Despite the fact they had an election just a year ago, and this election was considered a referendum on whether or not Georgia was going to join the EU because they're being considered for membership. They've been invited, and the process was well underway. And then once this new prime minister got in, he put a stop on the whole thing, and he was like, "Hold up, I don't know if we actually want to join the European Union. Y'all are pretty totalitarian. I think we're going to actually pivot more towards Russia now." And then he tries to pass the law. They're in the process of passing that law right now. And now you have this referendum vote occur. The people side with the prime minister and not with the European Union and the CIA. And now you have a revolution well underway in Tbilisi. How do you say that? How do you say that word?
Tbilisi.
Okay, well, I'll go with that. Tbilisi. One day I'll learn how to pronounce all these words, but until then, I'm just going to sound like a dummy saying them all. I'm okay with that. If people can say Nevada, then I can say I'm allowed to trip all over
Yes.
Tbilisi. So
yeah, here's some image or some footage of what's going on. And you see the European Union flags everywhere. There's some other ones that I've seen some other footage that had a lot of American flags as well as European Union flags. But yeah, very similar process to what happened in the Maidan in Ukraine in 2013 when Yanukovych, the elected president of Ukraine, said we're gonna pause our integration into the European Union and instead sign an economic deal with Russia because we want to have good relations with both the European Union and Russia at the same time. And as soon as he said that, that's when they activated these Azov Nazi run protest movements that were always designed and run by the State Department, by NGOs that were tied to George Soros, that had Victoria Nuland coordinating through the U.S. Embassy and Jeffrey Pyatt, the American ambassador, that was using it as a hub to coordinate the disruptions that would then get violent, turn bloody, and then justify a complete coup as a coup, and then install a puppet regime that has currently just taken Ukraine back to the Stone Age and turned it into a haven for BlackRock and the World Economic Forum to use it as the model for a broader great reset. So it's the same thing in Georgia that's being attempted. I don't know if they're not as successful yet, but it's getting scary. They've done several waves, and each wave is bigger than the previous wave. So it seems like they're getting a handle on putting this one down, but it's if they don't really find a way to force out all of these NGOs, they got to kick them out. They got to cut off the way Russia's been able to increasingly cut off American and British information warfare, information propaganda into the people. They have to cut off the people from this drug, this killer drug of propaganda that they're being given via social media, other things that are run by the West. They got to do that because the young people right now do not have enough of a handle on what's really shaping their world, let alone geopolitics. They don't seem to realize how they're going to destroy themselves if they're successful in overthrowing this government that's currently looking out for their sovereignty.
Yeah. Well, and it's worth noting, I mean, so the narrative right now is that the Western media is reporting is that journalists are now being physically attacked and beaten by the government, which does not make any sense. Doesn't make any sense if they just held 2 elections in the past 12 months, and in both elections, the people sided with the ruling, like the people who are now in power.
Yeah.
So if that is the case, then why would the government need to crack down on media if the people have already decided to side with the government? That's the kind of thing that happens when the people in power lose their grip on power and the people no longer support them and vote against them in an election. Then they start to crack down on media and lock people up. That's what was happening in Ukraine. That's what was happening in other places where we've seen some of this stuff happen. But the story here just doesn't make any sense. And so I think probably what's happening, if these people are actually being physically attacked, is they're probably being attacked by these NGOs or some of these operators who are in country, and there's a lot of money at stake. I mean, you're talking about these NGOs are probably bringing in, I'd imagine, millions, tens of millions of dollars, maybe more. And that money's being given to certain parties, and we're now talking about cutting off that funding. And so there's a lot of financial incentive for people in the government, in the country, to betray their own interests and to betray their own people and try to undermine this effort to do something that would be in the best interest of Georgian sovereignty.
Yeah. Well, on that note, there's an MO for this from the West, and Cynthia, my wife, did in her more recent book. She goes through in Vietnam how the Green Berets, and she uses the work of Colonel Fletcher Prouty, who is a very high level official within the Pentagon during the time before and during John F. Kennedy's administration. And he wrote a book. He advised Oliver Stone. He advised Jim Garrison on, when Oliver Stone made the JFK movie. Before that, he was the advisor, Deep Throat, who was advising Jim Garrison when he was carrying out the jury trial on the conspiracy to kill JFK. And Colonel Fletcher Prouty, that Cynthia used his research in her work, made the point that in Vietnam, one of the techniques used to terrorize the people living in North Vietnam that they wanted to force down to emigrate to South Vietnam, because they wanted to weaponize immigration from the North and get the people living in the North for generations to all migrate, which there was over 1 million people who did that down to the South. They wanted to create that crisis because they then needed that boiling point where they could convince people of the South that you have this big invasion of people who are stealing from you, because there was no economic opportunities that was going to be given to those people living in the North to go into the South. And so they would be forced to go into banditry to survive. They were starving to death. And then the people living in the communities in the South could be told, oh, these are Soviet agents that are out to get you. Now, the reason why they got those people to emigrate from the North is they had what were known as fun and games. So operations where they would train paramilitary groups, terrorists in the Philippines, in Japan, in different sections of Vietnam. The Green Berets would train them, deploy them to go and shoot up villages in the North, blaming it on the communists, so that the people then would leave. They would be so terrorized that they would be told that these represent the communists of Ho Chi Minh, which Ho Chi Minh had nothing to do with this. But then the people would leave out of terror and go to the South and then become forced to become the bandits that would then scare the shit out of the people in the South to then beg for American military invasions to come in to give them security again. And that was the technique that was, I had spoken to Syrians who came to Canada where I live, and I had spoken to many of them in 2013-14, and they would tell me, oh, you don't know what's going on in Syria. Bashar al-Assad has sent terrorist gangs to our different rural towns to kill our men and women and children. I saw it with my own eyes, and I believe that many of them saw masked men saying, "Long live Bashar al-Assad," murdering their family, murdering their villages. I'm sure that probably happened. But whoever proved that these masked men randomly coming into your villages saying, "Go Bashar al-Assad," and then killing innocent civilians, were actually working for Bashar al-Assad and not just terrorists trying to, polarize the people, which is what the effect was. And there's case of this happening all over the place. So I think what you're saying about Georgia and how these journalists we're being told the people are being massacred or being beaten up and tortured by the government. Journalists are being tortured. It's following sort of the same MO. And like, why do that if you've just won? You've got and they won with a significant majority. And same thing we're being told as well by, Michael Yon and other misinformation agents in the West that, China is torturing their people because they're afraid of a mass people's uprising in the slave state of China and stealing their organs. And it's like, well, China's got more economic development opportunities and like 96% support of the people, according to all surveys, including surveys done by the West, to see like how do the Chinese people feel about their government. It puts our surveys to shame. There's huge support, and the reason for it is there's massive economic opportunities for everybody in China, and you could prove that. And yet we're being told, oh, the Chinese are an illegitimate government that must be overthrown by democracy movements starting in Taiwan and then getting inland. And a lot of very well-intentioned people in the West are eating this stuff up, even if they know they should know better at this point, but they're still buying it. So it's good to just keep all of this in mind as a way to again, I'll use the word inoculate our minds from this type of viral lies that's being infused into our psyche to support global empire.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's also thinking about just human nature and like how people act, how people react, how people behave. A big part of architecture, which I've studied extensively in school and professionally, is understanding people, understanding like when you create a space for people, how are they going to use it? Like how are people going to react to conditions you give to them? So spend a lot of time thinking about that, a lot of time considering it, and you learn a lot from like observing how people have used spaces that have been built, how people use spaces that you have designed and built. You just learn a lot about people from observing them. And when you stop and think about how these things progress from a political standpoint, when these revolutions happen, when people start to turn against a strong man or start to turn against a ruling faction, typically clamping down and going harder against the people and exercising force against them accelerates the process of that person being overthrown. Typically, that's not a blanket application. There's always exceptions and things deviate, but typically if the people have already decided that they're going to rise up against a government or a power, clamping down and going harder against the people accelerates the violence and the kinetic escalation, and brings about a resolution one way or the other. It doesn't mean that people always succeed, but one way or another, you get to the end point of the end game of that conflict. And, when I look at Syria, there are a lot of white papers that have been written by the military industrial complex to support that narrative that Assad is the one funding ISIS and Assad's the one doing this to these people, which, of course, you have these people who are liars, who are prolific liars, writing these white papers supporting this notion. It also begs the question, if Assad, his country's being invaded by these different forces. We showed the map at the beginning of like the 100,000 plus people who came to Syria, paid mercenaries in many cases, to overthrow the Syrian government. Assad's job in that situation is to rally the people against the invading force. How do you rally the people if you're going around shooting up villages? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Like the logic doesn't follow like a logical path. Again, that doesn't mean that it's false, but it certainly supports the notion that it's a lie. And then the last thing is that same logic of like funding the bandits of the woods in order to keep the people in your kingdom scared so they support you and you remain in power. That like analogy. The media will apply that to a guy like Assad, but they won't apply it to a guy like Netanyahu. And it's very obvious that's what Netanyahu has done with Hamas and other groups. And it's just like the inconsistent logic and the inconsistent application of a filter and template and framing is, I think, what, for me, it just makes the whole thing blow up and just collapse in terms of being a logical framework.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I like part of this thing too. It's like I always try to my governing hypothesis when I'm trying to make sense of things in general is that humanity is not a mistake. Our differences are not a mistake, and nobody's perfect, but we're all trying to make things better by our nature, knowing that we're going to die. Like we're the only creature that has a sense of our mortality, or a sense of the immortality of our soul and the mortality of our bodies. And because of our capacity to have a relationship with the health of our souls, we can situate our identities, if we try, within a much broader historical framework. The more we know, the more we can position ourselves within a higher context of the deep past, the deep future. And again, the more we know, the more we can do it in a more coherent manner. The way that Benjamin Franklin or Martin Luther King Jr., when you read their writings and you look at what they did, they were very much situating their identities within a much, much more subtle fabric of global history that went deep into the future, and they were willing to die for the sake of the health of their souls. And I think all mature people, regardless of whatever religious matrix we come out of have tended to tap into that same truth, to draw from that same well, and to make policies, if they go into politics, that are geared towards the benefit of everybody. So you look for things like, again, just to remind people, what is scaring the oligarchy? What was scaring Samuel P. Huntington in the 70s? It's ideas like this that I know you've been moved by as well as I have. The Belt and Road Initiative, the 5 C's vision of development projects that would unite Sunni and Shia and Christian and Jewish, groups together in a common destiny of making things better for our kids. We got things like the north-south transportation corridor that this illustrates, going north to south from Mumbai through Iran, with Tehran as the center node of this multimodal system, all the way up into the north of Russia, and an east-west Belt and Road Initiative in orange as rail corridors going again through the Central Caucasus, through the Caspian, through Turkey, through Iran, all the way from China to Europe, with branches that could go all through the Middle East. We have things like this, the sub branch that's already being built with high-speed rail to modernize and industrialize the Arab world and Africa, with bridges throughout Africa that would drive development corridors, new cities. We know that that's all tied to the broader Belt and Road Initiative. That's reviving this idea of cooperation. Here's another image of it that was done by the Cradle. These are things that pass through Georgia, through Azerbaijan, through there's branches that go through Armenia, through Turkey. This one actually, interestingly enough, avoids Syria and Iraq, but could easily involve bringing in Syria and Iraq too. That's the sort of thing that if we commit to, projects that are 50, 60, 70 years in scope, it ennobles our sense of self-identity, our sense of what our security is. And then you look again at Georgia in that mix. And one thing I was thinking about a little bit, knowing that these Ark of Crisis freaks that came in with the neocons, the Straussians, have been obsessed with reviving the Crusades. That's tied to what they were doing with the clean break doctrine for Benjamin Netanyahu, securing the realm and supporting Greater Israel, is something that Saakashvili was installed in 2003, a guy who was trained by Harvard, funded by Soros and the National Endowment for Democracy, a CIA front, to illegally institute him as a puppet leader in Georgia in 2003 after the Rose Revolution. And what's the first thing he does? He takes the flag of Georgia, which was formerly this. That was the former flag between 1991 and 2003. And before 1991, it was this during the Cold War, the little Soviet hammer and sickle. Then it became this. And in 2003, this guy is brought in using a color revolution, installed as the puppet president. He changes the flag to something that you and I have talked about quite a bit, which is the current flag of Georgia, set up in 2003. And I was always bothered, like, why that flag? Why the flag of the Kingdom of Jerusalem? Of all of the flags you could have picked, why the Kingdom of Jerusalem? And sure enough, like when you look at it, the oligarchy thinks about these longer waves from a very devious standpoint. And this, by the way, is the Kingdom of Jerusalem. For those who don't know, that was one of the larger. This is not the full maximum scope of it, but the territory, which lasted for about 2 centuries, starting in 1098 after the First Crusade, or 1099. It endured until about the earlier mid 13th century, which was mostly Templar, a Templar run, Knights of Malta run, or back then it was the Knights Hospitaller run, mercenary kingdom that utilized this, the 4 little crosses and the big cross as their symbol, that took over control of much of the Arab world, and that certain people want to bring back today under the control of a new sort of eco-Vatican, weaponized Catholic fascist sort of agenda. It's a weird thing, but there's a big obsession that is all over the place to do that. And when you look at the original, like the choice of that for Georgia's flag, that was actually the flag that was then brought into Georgia when it was a kingdom in the 13th century, and that was Georgia at its maximum extent in 1210 AD. Yeah. So it's much bigger than today's Georgia.
And it looks like Mount Ararat is potentially part of it, or very close to being part of it. Mount Ararat is where it's highly believed, I mean, proven basically, that's where Noah's Ark is located.
Is it really? Okay.
Eastern Turkey, basically right where that body of water, that lake you're seeing there, it's near there. Yeah, but that leans into what you're saying. It talks about like the biblical stuff is that certainly leans into it, because the CIA has documents that have been declassified that show photographs and charts, and they spent a lot of time documenting that there's most certainly a very large structure that appears to be an ark.
Well, I don't know if I necessarily
in the general vicinity of where the whole thing would have taken place, but that's probably a different episode.
I'm personally not convinced that it is the ark from the Bible, but I do agree that like during this period, the Caspian, the Baltic, like all of these during the last ice age with the big flood of the ice caps, you would have had huge disruptions of water systems. Actually, well, during the last ice age, water levels were like 500 meters deeper on average across the world. So most of the coastal communities, the civilizations that would have largely have been, they would have grown up around water systems would be submerged. So there's a lot underwater right now that has been covered up by UNESCO so that they want to keep us ignorant to these deeper civilizations that were active within the ice age period. There's all sorts of interesting astroclimatological phenomenon, right? Like our science of climatology has been so controlled to keep us ignorant to the nature of what the sun is doing, how it's interfacing with our magnetic field of the earth to modulate the flow of cosmic radiation that shapes and drives cloud formation, cooling, warming, all of these things. We don't even know where water comes from, frankly. We're being kept ignorant. Where oil comes from, we're being told it was like fossilized dinosaurs.
Dinosaur juice. It's dinosaur juice, bro.
Yeah, man. Of course, everyone knows that.
Yeah.
No, it's retarded, right? It's like, no, it seems like the earth is generating. There's a generative power that we've yet to understand within the earth that's generating hydrocarbons, that's generating water. We don't know a lot about most of anything. Like we're scratching the surface. But definitely, yeah, what you're saying about like evidence of ships that would be on mountaintops, interesting stuff, man. Like it challenges our whole idea of the standard model hydrology and archaeology for sure. But that's all that to say, like this whole Templar thing, the fact that the neocon Straussians brought this guy in, had him select the Kingdom of Jerusalem icon as his flag. And I know that there is a movement to try to romanticize the restoration of the past grandeur of like some imaginary past Ukrainian empire, the Polish-Lithuanian empire, like all of these like revivalist sacred stories that are part of, because all of these regime change operations done by color revolutions, they work because they use sacred stories that they sell to young people who have been degraded, and they want to feel pride in something again. And they're told, when your great grandparents were alive, you were great. You were the ethnically superior grouping, actually, of whether they market it to the Polish Lithuanians or to the Romanians or to whomever, right? Or they're like, and you can. That's what they did to the Germans. The Germans were told, look in the past Teutonic greatness. Yep. You were the alphas of the world, and you can revive that today. And Hitler was drinking that stuff up, reading the Ostara magazine of the Ariosophists, being told all of these stories of these Crusader Teutonic, pseudo-Christian pagan glory days of the pure races of the Viking tribes that rose to power, and we can reclaim that power again today. And so was Heidegger and all of these people, who were inspiring Leo Strauss. They were all using these sacred myths. And that's what I see sort of also being sold to some Georgian idiots about this grand kingdom of Georgia that interfaced with the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem and was used as a bridge or whatever. And you got these same idiot Jabotinskyites in Israel being told of the greatness of Solomon's temple and how we could just revive our past greatness today and become God's chosen people again, or we are, but reclaim our evidence of it by having
bring the Messiah. I think the idea is to create greater Israel in time to bring in the Messiah in 2027, I believe is the time frame that they're talking about.
Is that their time frame? They actually have a number on that?
I think my understanding, and I could be wrong. This is just what I've seen from various sources. Is just that I believe the 6,000-year Jewish calendar ends in October 2027. Somebody fact check me on that. I could be completely wrong about that, but I think it's a 6,000-year cycle, and that the calendar, at least in this one belief system, I don't know if it's all Jewish, all Judaism, or just this one belief system, but the calendar ends in October 2027, and basically that's when it has to be done by then. The Messiah has to come by then, or else. And there's a video of the Rebbe, like the very famous Rebbe from New York City, from the Chabad in 1990, telling Bibi Netanyahu, time is running out. Like, you're running out of time. You need to get this done. Like the Messiah's coming. You need to get this done. Okay. And it's like, what are y'all talking about? But
all right. So tell you what, I have. There's a little emergency that just happened, so I'm gonna have to quickly run. But maybe,
is there an ad read?
There's an ad that is going to be played, and it won't be a read, but I'll try to get. I'll play it right now. It's My Pillow, and then I'll come right back. 1 second.
All right, sounds good.
Because of your overwhelming support, our 1488 MyPillow has been one of the biggest sales in MyPillow history. I couldn't think of a better way to say thank you than to extend our wholesale pricing through Christmas. Get a classic standard MyPillow for only $14.88. Upgrade to a queen size, just $18.88. King size, only $1 more. Get my body pillows for only $29.88. And ready? Multi-use My Pillows, only $9.88. It's perfect time to stock up for Christmas gifts for everyone on your list. Go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to take advantage of our wholesale pricing, including my classic standard My Pillows, only $14.88. But that's not all. I'm so confident you're going to love our classic My Pillows that I'm going to extend my 60-day money-back guarantee until March 1st, 2025. Plus, orders over $75 ship absolutely free.
All right. Thank you, Mike Lindell. We're going to go ahead and knock out the rants. Hit that thumbs up if you are listening, if you're still here with us. It certainly helps us get up the leaderboard. Backdoor Biden, $10. I've been very worried about Syria. Saw Candace had someone on to talk about how bad news it was. I skipped it. Yeah, I mean it's not great. It's not like a good development, but I'm gonna try to mute Matt. I remain hopeful that it's going to remain that's going to work out, because I do think that maybe we're seeing a feign. I think maybe there's a feign that Assad pulled away, because all of the reporting from every side is that ISIS and Al-Qaeda just rolled through. The Syrians basically threw their guns down after fighting for 12 years and just gave up. And there's different theories that we don't need to get into right now about why that happened. We'll see what happens. We're going to keep we're going to keep monitoring it. All right, and then we have one more rant, and then we're going to
hopefully this was a trap, right? Like, I know Alex Craner.
Trap.
Huh?
Yeah. Hopefully it's a trap. Yes.
Yeah. So if that's true, I do sincerely hope that this was a well-coordinated trap, as Alex Craner and others have pointed out. Hopefully that's true.
Yes. Hopefully that is true. Sean Joe, $5. Always enjoy your shows. Thank you, Sean Joe. And that's it. Thank you, guys. Please hit the thumbs up on your way out. I think that about does it. So
I would add one thing just quickly. Cynthia and I, we just produced a new documentary. Cynthia ran it. Highly recommend people check it out on CanadianPatriot.org. It's called oh geez, I don't want to screw up the name here. Here, I'm just gonna go to the website. Actually, here, it's called Like a Phoenix: The Death and Rebirth of America. It goes through the entire operation to try to burn down the United States by getting a lot of Americans who are otherwise patriotic to do it to themselves, utilizing techniques that were developed in Operation Phoenix in Vietnam. and Tavistock, which had its own Operation Phoenix during World War II, which applied itself to shaping the Vietnam operation, as well as certain things that were done to Phoenix the Native Americans in the 19th century, overseen by a nest of Jesuits operating through the Smithsonian. And it brings in both Eric and Brett Weinstein into play and the entire intellectual dark web in a very, very disgusting fashion that I really want people to check this out and share this documentary. We want this to get a lot more traction, because I do think that the insights that Cynthia is bringing to bear are super duper important to internalize. So I'll just throw that out there as a little plug. And otherwise, yeah, this is cool. Thank you, Ghost, and thank you, Gordon, and thank you, everybody.
Yeah, and thank you. I see people in the chat linking to some of those videos. There's a video from Alex Kreiner from my Telegram. I plug that stuff in the comments. So if you're listening to this stuff later, I grab some of the stuff that people were linking in the chats and put them in the comments. Thanks, everyone. I need to bolt, but everyone have a good day.
Ciao.